The city skyline stretched wide and endless outside the glass walls of Coal Industries, a fortress of steel and ambition built by one man's determination. Inside, the air was quiet except for the soft ticking of a luxury clock and the muted shuffle of papers. Ethan Cole sat behind a vast oak desk, the kind that seemed designed not just for work, but for intimidation. His suit was perfectly tailored, his posture straight, his face unreadable, an image of power that the world had come to respect and fear. But beneath the surface, behind the polished image of the ruthless CEO, there was something hollow. Ethan carried the weight of success like armor, but armor had its cost. It was heavy, suffocating, and it left no room for warmth. The man who could command boardrooms and close billion-dollar deals returned each night to a house that echoed with silence. Only one voice broke that silence: his daughter's. 8-year-old Lily Cole was the center of Ethan's universe, even if he didn't always know how to show it. Her laughter was rare these days, tucked away behind shy smiles and quiet play. Since her mother's passing years ago, she had grown used to her father's long hours and the distance he carried like a shadow. Still, she clung to him, and he clung to her, the last fragile piece of a family they once were. Yet, the world outside their home was relentless. Investors whispered about Ethan's image, journalists speculated about his personal life, and rivals painted him as a lonely, cold figure, brilliant but untouchable. As the date of the annual corporate gala approached, the pressure mounted. Every year, the event was a stage where power was measured not only by profit margins, but by the company one kept. And every year, Ethan arrived alone, enduring the subtle smirks, the questions dressed as jokes. "Still no one by your side, Cole?" This year, he decided it would be different. Not because he cared for appearances, at least that's what he told himself, but because he was tired of the pity that lingered in the air around him. He wanted silence, and if that meant bringing someone to play the role of his partner, then so be it. That was how Sophie Bennett entered his life. She arrived on a crisp evening, standing at the doorway of his home in a simple black dress that caught the dim hallway light. She was younger than Ethan expected, 27, with soft brown hair that framed her face and eyes that carried both warmth and something unspoken, like a shadow from her past. She was poised, professional, yet there was a gentleness about her that seemed at odds with the role she had been hired to play. Their first exchange was brief, almost transactional. Ethan, ever the businessman, explained the expectations, the gala, the investors, the need for her to appear at his side. Sophie nodded with quiet confidence, not asking for more than the agreed terms. To him, it was a business arrangement. To her, perhaps the same. But to Lily, it was something entirely unexpected. The night of the gala, the grand ballroom shimmered with chandeliers and polished marble floors, alive with laughter and the clinking of glasses. Ethan, in his black tuxedo, carried the familiar weight of eyes upon him. But for once, those eyes shifted, drawn to the woman at his side. Sophie wasn't just beautiful. She was disarmingly genuine. She smiled when others forced politeness. She listened when others only spoke of themselves. Investors leaned in, charmed not by her appearance but by the ease she brought into the room. Still, Ethan's mind was elsewhere, split between the conversations he endured and the small figure hiding under the linen-draped table near the corner. Lily had slipped away from the glittering crowd, her little dress bunched around her knees as she played with the folds of fabric like it was a secret fort. She hated these events, hated the way adults bent down with stiff smiles and called her adorable before walking away. Sophie noticed before Ethan did. While Ethan negotiated another round of forced pleasantries, Sophie quietly excused herself, her eyes softening as she crouched beside the table where Lily hid. Instead of coaxing her out with the usual adult sweetness, Sophie slid under the table too, her dress brushing the floor as she sat cross-legged like a child. She picked up a napkin, folded it once, twice, and within moments a little swan took shape. Lily's eyes widened, her shyness melting into wonder. Another napkin became a frog, then a flower. For the first time that night, Lily laughed, a small bubbling sound that made Ethan's head turn. He watched from across the room, momentarily forgetting the investors and the sharp edge of his reputation. He saw his daughter smiling, her eyes alight in a way he hadn't seen in years. And beside her, Sophie's face glowed with genuine care, not the performance of someone paid to pretend. When the night finally ended and they returned home, Ethan carried Lily upstairs, her head heavy on his shoulder, her hand clutching one of Sophie's napkin swans. He tucked her into bed, kissed her forehead, and stood there longer than usual, watching the rise and fall of her breathing. Later, as he closed her bedroom door, Lily's sleepy voice drifted through the dark. "Daddy," she murmured. "Can she stay forever?" Ethan froze, his hand still on the doorframe. The words were innocent, spoken half in dream, but they pierced deeper than any deal, deeper than any loss he had endured. He had hired Sophie for one night, but his daughter's heart had already imagined a future where the lonely walls of their home no longer echoed the same way. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt something stir inside him, something dangerous, something he had vowed never to feel again. The house felt different after that night. Ethan tried to ignore it, tried to convince himself that nothing had changed. Sophie had been hired for a single purpose: to attend a gala, to quiet the rumors, to play a role, and then disappear. That was the plan. That was how Ethan kept his world under control, neat, ordered, untouched by the chaos of emotion. But Lily did not see Sophie as an arrangement. To her, Sophie was the first person in a long time who had truly looked at her, spoken to her, laughed with her without the stiff politeness of strangers. The napkin swan now sat proudly on her bedside table, a treasure more valuable than any toy her father had ever bought. And so, the next morning, when Sophie appeared in the kitchen, unexpected, carrying a paper bag of pastries and a shy smile, Lily's entire face lit up. "Daddy, she's here!" Lily exclaimed, rushing to the door in her pajamas. Ethan hesitated. He wanted to ask Sophie why she had come, to remind her that their agreement had ended the night before, but the words caught in his throat when he saw Lily's arms wrap around Sophie's waist, clinging with the kind of trust that Ethan had thought his daughter no longer offered to anyone. Against his better judgment, Ethan let Sophie stay for breakfast. She wasn't polished or strategic like the women in his world. She was ordinary. She buttered her toast unevenly. She laughed at Lily's messy attempts to spread jam, and when Ethan reached automatically for his phone at the table, she gently placed a hand over his wrist and said, "Just for this meal, be here." It was such a simple thing, but it left him unsettled. Few people ever dared to tell him what to do. Even fewer managed to make him listen. Days turned into weeks, and Sophie became a quiet presence in their lives. Sometimes she visited after Lily's school hours, bringing books, teaching her little songs, or sitting cross-legged on the living room floor while they built castles from blocks. Other times she joined them for dinner, her laughter weaving into the silence that once filled the dining room. Ethan told himself it was for Lily, that the girl needed someone to soften the sharp edges of their lives. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. He found himself watching Sophie when she wasn't looking, noticing the way her eyes softened when Lily hugged her, or how her smile faltered when she thought no one was paying attention. There was something behind her warmth, a shadow she carried but never spoke of. One night, long after Lily had gone to bed, Ethan found Sophie alone in the kitchen, rinsing cups in the sink. The light from the overhead lamp traced a tiredness in her features that she usually hid so well. "You don't have to do that," Ethan said, his voice lower than usual. She glanced at him, shrugged lightly. "I like helping. Feels normal." The word lingered in the air. Normal. A life Sophie had never fully known, and one Ethan had lost long ago. He almost asked her then, about her past, about why someone like her would choose this line of work. But the words dissolved before they left his mouth. He wasn't ready to hear the answer, and she wasn't ready to give it. Instead, he found himself telling her about Lily, about the way she used to laugh with her mother, about how quiet she had become since the loss. Ethan's voice cracked once, just slightly, and Sophie's eyes filled with the kind of compassion he hadn't seen in years. "You're doing better than you think," she whispered. Her words unsettled him more than criticism ever could. For a man who lived his life by control, Sophie's presence was beginning to undo the careful walls he had built, but the cracks in that armor came with risk. At Coal Industries, Ethan noticed the whispers growing louder. Board members speculated about the young woman who appeared at his side. Rivals hinted at scandal, suggesting that Ethan Cole, the untouchable CEO, was reckless enough to let emotion cloud his judgment. He brushed it off, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Could he truly let someone like Sophie into his world without consequence? The answer came unexpectedly one evening when Ethan returned home early from the office. He stepped quietly into the hallway and froze at the sound of laughter spilling from the living room. Sophie and Lily sat on the floor surrounded by sheets of colored paper, scissors, and glue. They were making a paper city, their hands sticky, their faces bright with joy. Ethan stood there, unseen, watching the scene unfold. He felt a pang of something he couldn't name. Longing, regret, maybe even hope. The home that had once felt so silent was now alive with sound, and it scared him as much as it warmed him. That night, after Lily had fallen asleep clutching one of the paper houses, Sophie rose to leave. But Ethan stopped her at the door. His hand hovered near hers, not touching but close enough for her to feel the hesitation in his breath. "You don't have to go," he said quietly. Sophie's eyes searched his, uncertain, vulnerable. For a moment it seemed like she might stay, but then, just as quickly, she stepped back. "Ethan, I can't." Her voice trembled with something heavier than rejection. It was fear, shame, a truth she wasn't ready to share. Before he could ask, she slipped into the night, leaving Ethan standing in the doorway with more questions than answers. Upstairs, Lily stirred in her sleep, murmuring Sophie's name. Ethan sat beside her bed, brushing a strand of hair from her face, his chest tightening at the sight of her peaceful smile. For Lily, Sophie had already become part of their family. For Ethan, Sophie had become a risk he didn't know how to face. And for Sophie, she carried secrets that threatened to shatter it all. The walls of Ethan's life were cracking, and through those cracks something fragile and dangerous was trying to take root. Love. The weeks that followed were heavier. The air in Ethan's home carried an unspoken tension, a sense that something fragile hovered just out of reach. Sophie still came around, sometimes for Lily, sometimes because Ethan found himself unable to tell her no. But there was a distance in her eyes now, a flicker of conflict that even Lily began to notice. One evening after dinner, Lily asked the question that Ethan himself had been avoiding. "Daddy," she whispered, leaning against his arm. "Why does Sophie always look like she wants to cry when she leaves?" Ethan had no answer. He only held his daughter closer, his mind swirling with doubts. He knew Sophie was hiding something, but he didn't know what, or if he wanted to know. Part of him feared that whatever truth lay buried would only confirm what the world already whispered, that a man like him could never afford something so fragile as love. The truth arrived sooner than he expected. It happened on a rainy Thursday night. Sophie came over with Lily's favorite chocolate cookies, her smile stretched thin, her laughter faint. When Lily finally drifted to bed, Sophie lingered in the living room, her hands clasped tightly as if bracing herself. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice low. Ethan studied her, his instincts sharpening. He had seen this look before, in negotiations, in confessions, in the moments before truths shattered illusions. Sophie took a breath, her hands trembling. "I wasn't honest with you. About who I am, about why I do this work." She told him then, haltingly, her words spilling like cracks in a dam, about the years she had spent trying to survive after her family abandoned her, about debts that pulled her into choices she never wanted, about the shame she carried, not because she was unworthy, but because she feared no one could see beyond the surface. "I didn't come into your life to play games," she said softly, "but I never believed I deserved to stay in it. Not with someone like you, not with someone like Lily." For a long time, Ethan said nothing. His jaw tightened, his chest rising and falling with the weight of anger, not at her, but at himself. He had built his life on control, on knowing every variable, every risk. And here was a truth he hadn't prepared for, breaking through his carefully built walls. "You should have told me," he finally said, his voice sharper than he intended. Sophie flinched, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I know. I was afraid, and I didn't want to lose this." Her hand gestured faintly toward the upstairs where Lily slept. "I didn't want to lose her smile." Ethan turned away, pacing, his mind a storm. He wanted to push her out, to protect himself, to protect Lily from disappointment. That was the safe choice, the logical choice. But then a small sound broke through the storm. A door creaking upstairs, the soft padding of little feet. Lily appeared at the top of the staircase, rubbing her eyes, holding her paper swan. "Are you leaving again?" she asked, her voice small. The sight of her daughter standing there, so fragile, so hopeful, pierced Ethan's chest. He realized then that the safe choice was not the right one. He had spent years building walls to keep pain away, but in doing so, he had also kept love away, from himself and from his daughter. He knelt, his voice softer now. "Lily, Sophie isn't leaving. Not if we don't want her to." Sophie's breath caught, her eyes widening. "Ethan!" He turned to her, and for the first time in years, let his heart speak louder than his fear. "You don't have to be perfect to be here. You don't have to hide. What matters is what you've given us, what you've given her, and I can't let fear take that away." The room fell quiet, broken only by the steady rhythm of rain against the windows. Sophie stood frozen, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Lily hurried down the stairs, wrapping her arms around Sophie's waist, her voice muffled against the fabric of her dress. "Please stay," she whispered. And just like that, the decision was no longer Sophie's alone. It was theirs. A father, a daughter, and the woman who had walked into their lives by chance but stayed by choice. Ethan reached out, his hand steady as it brushed against Sophie's. For years, his life had been defined by loss, by walls, by silence. Tonight, for the first time, it was defined by something else. Something fragile, terrifying, and beautiful. Family. Not the perfect picture investors wanted. Not the story the world expected. But theirs. Messy, uncertain, and real. As the rain eased outside, the three of them stood together in the warm glow of the living room. And Ethan knew, with a clarity sharper than any deal he had ever signed, that love was not a weakness to be feared. It was the only thing that had the power to heal. Forever wasn't a promise he had ever dared to make before. But now, looking at Sophie and Lily, at the home that no longer felt hollow, Ethan understood that forever had already begun.